This is TWiT.
I did get the new Mac Mini. I haven't gone through the extensive testing that you did.
Which one
Jason.
Which one did you get?
I got the top of the line. I got the best. The only thing I didn't go crazy on is 10 gigabit Ethernet.
The drive speed, in case you're wondering, is screaming. Jason Baishu is a friend of mine. He has the top of the line one, and I just asked him. I said, "Can you run a drive speed test?" It's like over 6 gigs a second.
Yeah, here's my Black Magic speed test results from it. It pegged. What's weird, I was talking with Jason about this before the show, is it's pegged the write at 6.6 gigabytes. Gigabytes, not bits, gigabytes per second. The read is slower at 5.3 gigabytes. Now, normally on an SSD, read is faster than write. I think it's I/O constrained or something. It's plenty fast enough, 5.4
so fast.
gigabytes a second read speed. But it should be faster, shouldn't it, than the write speed?
It usually is, but for whatever reason, it's not. But it's still faster than
enough.
Its read speed is faster than my Mac Studio, and its write speed is much faster.
Yeah.
So I don't even know what you would use the write speed at that speed. I mean, because I will say the read speed typically is more important to us because we've got a bunch of big files, and
right.
But it also means that when you are, if you're compressing something or writing something, it means that writing to drive will be extremely fast. And it makes a difference. Like if you're running compressor and you've got a big file, the drive speed is everything. And that's really where all the time is spent. So it definitely makes a difference.
And also the Ars Technica review had a nice little detail that if you went for the cheapest storage segment, 256 gigs, that's spread across 2 modules. And they said that it's faster than a single module. So there's advantages for going cheap, I guess.
This is a picture of it. I don't have it. It's hooked up. I'm using it. But I did take a picture of it with a Buddha for size, just so underneath is the old studio. It is a really cute little doohickey. It's so adorbs.
I really like the idea of, like, someone was, after the power button gate, let's call it, someone was saying, well, yeah, but if you've got it mounted like at the edge of your desk underneath, like if it's a perfect place. I think they're being serious about it too. And actually looking at it, I'm like, okay, well, that's very plausible because you're not blocking any air vents. You will have like your ports like right in front of you, like for the ones that you actually need. It will reduce desktop clutter. I mean, it looks like a hub wherever you put it. It's going to be so much fun to play with this. Just where all the ways that I've configured my desk over the years to accommodate a CPU, and now it's like, oh well, I have a power brick now that is bigger than the CPU that's going to be the hub of my entire desktop.
You could always, somebody said turn it upside down, and then the power button's on the top, and the cooling will be better, and the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi will have a better access to the air. And if you don't mind the aesthetics of it.
And if you inevitably use it as a coaster, which any flat surface on your desk is, and you spill something,
then you don't have to worry
about it dying.
Then
it'll definitely do that.
I mounted my Mac Studio under my desk when I got the M1 Mac Studio, and it's great because it's invisible. And between hubs and Thunderbolt cables, like I'm running a Thunderbolt cable straight to my monitor. So that's one cable, and then you can attach things to the ports on the back of the monitor. You can also have hubs and things under your desk. I'm a big fan of the idea of, like, if you can do a setup under your desk, then you can have all these things, all these wires and peripherals and stuff under there, and you never see them. And in this scenario, it's exactly right that you end up with if it's suspended basically under your desk, the airflow is at the bottom, the power button is accessible. Yeah. It's all just kind of right there. It's a pretty good way to live, and this will be even better.
I'm waiting for the aftermarket things to do that, though, right?
I mean, first there'll be the 3D prints on Etsy. Then there'll be the companies that can afford to do a run of actual plastic at a factory, and then there'll be the ones who cut the metal versions of them that'll be a little bit nicer. And I watched that all happen because my Mac Studio is suspended with a Lucite mount that was meant for the old Mac Mini, excuse me, and a hard drive.
Yeah,
it fits. Yeah. So I used it.
I have all my computers set up to restart at power loss. So as a result, I have hit the button on my Mac Mini. I have 4 Mac Minis here. I'm putting another one in for something else, and they're all stacked up. So having it on the bottom will be inconvenient for me. For the 2 times that I've done it in the last 2 years, 2 years. I was trying to remember. I was like, I can't even remember when I ever used that power supply, because usually it comes with me. The only time I need the power supply is when I move things around, I've replugged everything in. And when I do that, they all come right back up again.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what Greg Joswiak and John Turnus were interviewed by a Chinese content creator on Bilibili, and pretty much said what was the most logical thing, which is that A, we didn't think it was a big deal because people rarely need to power cycle the Mac anyway, and also kind of like what we were indicating like last week, the week before, the button has to go somewhere. And especially when you're making something smaller, packaging becomes such an issue that it goes where you can fit the power button. And they're certainly not going to re-engineer everything to make it go from the front or the side, especially if they, once again, think that it's not something you're going to want to access that much anyway. I mean, even on my Intel Mac Mini, there's a power button, but it's like so blended into the back corner of it that I almost can't, if I reach around to try to feel it, I almost can't feel it. So power buttons on Macs has never been something that they've been really innovative in or desired to be innovative in.
Jason, is it quiet? Is yours quiet? I haven't heard mine, the fan come on.
Well, Dan Morin reviewed that one, so he's got it. And he said he and I had the whole, like, is there a fan in there? And there absolutely is. Yeah. But it is very quiet. And I think they sent him the non-pro model. And if it's anything like we've seen with other systems in Apple Silicon, you really need the Pro model, and then you need to kick the GPU and probably the CPU. And even then, like, is there much fan noise? And remember, the original Mac Studio had a bit of fan noise, but they've quieted it down, and I think that it's there, but you basically can't hear. You'd have to work really hard to hear it at all.
It doesn't get warm.
Hold it to your ear like it's a shell or something. That's what you'd have to do.
It gets warm maybe in... if I'm playing a game, although I haven't noticed that. It was a little warm when I was first transferring everything over from the M1 Mac Studio. Little warm, not hot by any means. I think it's pretty intimate. It's sometimes when you have something that small, you have heat problems, but I think this thing is a wizard. And I'm sure the Studio will be even wizarder.
Yeah. There's another detail from the Ars review on that point where with the M4 PowerBooks, MacBooks, and also the new Mac Mini, they've added high power mode to these models as well, not just like the Pro models before. Yes. So that's the model where if they're saying, well, okay, screw it, we need high performance. We don't care about the noise. We'll just we'll do as best as we'll be Scotty in the engine room, screaming about, okay, it's barely containing it right now, but you've got 12 seconds before warp core breach.
Yeah, which is nice for I took the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which has the M4 Pro processor, and I put it in high power mode. And for those who don't know, high power mode is literally just run the fans as hard as you need to. Yeah. That's all it is. It doesn't change the chip, except in the sense that the chip doesn't throttle at the point where it would otherwise. They are willing to do a certain level of throttle to keep the laptop, or in this case, the desktop, quiet. But high power mode exists to basically say, I don't care how loud it gets, just run it as fast as you can.
And if you are in a production on site, or you're trying to record a voiceover or something, being able to throttle it down, you don't need all the speed, but you need to keep running, and so and not make a lot of fan noise. So it's a good little switch to have there. Yeah.
Although I have to say, I think it was Tom's Hardware that noted in their benchmarks that the high power mode didn't really make it that much faster. It's fast.
They're all super problem.
Well, so it's a question of how you measure it, and the people over at Tomscat are very smart. But I would say I haven't seen that test. What happens is, to really measure performance, if you take it in high power mode versus not, it's about a lot of heat over a long time, because you need to get it to throttle. And first off, these systems are really hard to throttle anyway. I mean, in some cases, I found you've really got to kill the GPU and the CPU simultaneously in order to get so much heat in that system that it says, I got to slow down. And then you put it in high. So high power mode is intended to just never get there. I would imagine that there is a difference. But again, I mean, high power mode is weird. Like, you probably shouldn't use it, right? Like, you probably, but I suppose if you really need to get that, like, yeah, I mean, you're right. She can't take much more, Captain, to use the Scotty metaphor again. You probably shouldn't use it. But what I like about it, they have had various scandals about throttling and all of that. And I think that they finally decided, look, if you don't like throttling, fine. We will crank up the fan.
Yeah.
and it will be annoying, but you will get because I was able to get that fan to be real loud on the MacBook Pro
Right.
when I was playing a game. And like, great. Like, if you want that, you can choose to have it. But by default, it's going to run the fan a little quieter and throttle when it needs to. And that's fine. You get to choose. It's nice that they give you the choice, right? I think that was the problem with their old philosophy a few years ago about charging, battery levels, power levels, and throttling and all that, is that Apple is inclined by its nature to hide those things from the user. And they got called out. And so they're like, all right, we're going to set some defaults, but it's up to you to decide if you want to charge your battery to 100% and if you want the fans to come on or if you want us to throttle. And so it's a funny feature, high power mode, right? It's intentionally contrasting with the low power mode when your battery is running out. But it's there if you want to hear some fan noise. It's great.
It's likely that the benchmarks that people use don't really challenge the high power mode because they're short.
Yeah, that's
you need
right.
to
Actually,
do something for a long time before.
Cinebench is pretty good because Cinebench, I'm sorry, we're really in the weeds now in terms of benchmarking tools, but right, like a fast chip is going to run the benchmark fast. And therefore, it'll peak and then it'll come down, which tells you something about peak performance, but it doesn't necessarily tell you about a sustained job, right? So Cinebench is different in that, first off, by default, I mean, you can get a Cinebench score with one pass, but what they want you to do by default is run it for 10 minutes. And there's also basically an endless mode where it just keeps going. And that can be really useful because what you want to see is what happens after 10 minutes of running it. After 10 minutes of high test, killing the GPU, where it's presumably heated up a lot and is struggling to cool itself, how fast is it then? Which tells you something different than what it's like after a minute. It really does. So Geekbench is great, but Cinebench, especially if you extend it out, can tell you more because it will run a long time. And that's sometimes, like I did this when I was reviewing the MacBook Air versus the MacBook Pro, right? Because the M4 MacBook Pro and the M3 before it has a fan, and the Air doesn't have a fan. Ironically, given the name Air, anyway.
There's no Air,
and you have to run that test. You have to run tests for a long time to see the separation between those two systems, because that's when the fan helps, and then you can see that it's a little faster when it's got a fan.
So Andrew Cunningham says Apple's best Mac Minis ever. I mean, that's not saying a lot. I mean, because it's always the best iPhone ever
hopefully
as well,
it's the next the best computer ever.
It's always
they're
butterfly
backwards.
The butterfly keys were a step backwards. The touch bar maybe a step backwards. So maybe not the best, but
I think it is the case that this is more than just the best ever. This is like
it's a huge.
I think it appeals to a broader section of the market than ever before.
A higher end,
because it reaches. Yeah, I mean, like, Apple keeps shaving off, like, who even needs a Mac Studio, let alone a Mac Pro at this point? Like, that M4 Pro chip is so strong. It has taken such a leap forward in so many ways in terms of performance that, like, between that and the MacBook Pro as well, like, do you need more than the Pro chip? I mean, if you need lots and lots and lots of GPU cores, like, you can get twice as many on the Max chip. So that's okay, right? But, like, I don't know, like, we're just slicing it thinner and thinner and thinner, where, like, it used to be the Mac Mini was kind of underpowered, and you're like, I could use a Mac Mini. Well, I'll put it in a closet as a server, but I'm not me. I'm not going to touch it because it's dirty and consumery. And it's like, now, if you need a computer on your desk, like, and you're even a pro and doing video and stuff, unless you're at a super high level, like, how many people need the power beyond the M4 Pro? It is, and the Mac Mini. Like, it's all there for most people now.
Yeah,
Cunningham calls it the default desktop Mac, and I think that's I
agree with that. Yeah. That's like, it really comes down to, like, if you're running research models, data models, weather models, that you need it's an obscene amount of memory, system memory. That's when you go for the Pro. Everything else, though, why would you even bother? Yeah.
I mean, and you have to put it in perspective. The new Mac Mini supports up to 3 monitors, right, at all levels, I believe. Yeah. And you're talking about being able to take a Mac Mini and put 3 4K monitors. It's actually 2 displays up to 6K and 1 up to 4K or whatever, but 3 4K monitors on it. Get a Hawanu or whatever ARM, and now you have 3 of these monitors around you with this tiny little computer, and that still costs less than an iMac. And so now you have this huge, amount of real estate that is one little computer. This is 95% of the market. I mean, just the $599 version that came out, or $499 if you're EDU, is 95% of the market right there. It's
part of it is because Apple has now started at 16 gigs of RAM.
Yeah,
and that's adequate
well,
now. Right?
I will tell you,
the entry level is good.
I have 8 of the 8 gig M1s, and they're working great.
Right.
So they're I will say that, I mean, for an average person, there's we can't run, but I open Photoshop on them. I do lots of things. It's so I don't. I mean, 16 gigs is obviously a huge jump up, but the 8 gig for a lot of the stuff that the average person does, and even for me running Zoom and all kinds of other things, like lots of Zoom, like 16 channels of Zoom or 8 channels of Zoom, has been working on a 8 gig Mac Mini.
Yeah.
so it's pretty amazing.
Also, I mean, look, the reason you mention that is because Apple charges kind of an exorbitant premium for both RAM and storage. And so the base model, which is 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of storage, is the low price. But that's probably good enough for most people, yeah?
I'd say 90 to 95% of their market is my guess.
Especially since it has such a high-speed external port that you can attach external storage. RAM you can't, but you can attach external storage.
Also, I think it is critically important that the minimum buy-in for a Mac remains at $599, $499 for education. So I'm very much in favor of Apple doing whatever they have to do to the minimal SKU to make sure that that doesn't change. And again, that's the minimum amount of money you can walk in to the Apple Store with and walk out with a working Mac. And that's always been one of the most attractive things about the Mac Mini.
And I highly recommend people thinking about, I mean, as someone who's had lots of all the different Apple Mac products that are out there, really think about Mac Minis, because, having being able to have your monitor, and then when you want to swap out the computer, you're not paying for another monitor. When you go to a new iMac, you're paying for a whole nother monitor that you may or may not need. With a Mac Mini, and the reason I have so many of them is I stack them up, I connect them to lots of different monitors, and when I buy a new one, I'm only buying the processor and the connectivity. Like, I'm not buying all the other things that are required, and it's such a great platform to do that. And I have Mac Minis that are 10 years old in my system that are doing something. They're managing keys, they're managing something else. And someone was asking me, like, well, what happens when you need to repair them? I was like, I've never had to repair a Mac Mini, like ever, like ever.
Let me correct myself. Paul McCann's telling me the base model is 256 gigs storage. Is that enough?
It depends
For a base model, that's fine. That's enough. You can install a base array of apps on. If you're running Photoshop, if you're doing video editing, and you want assets to be as close to the CPU as possible, maybe not. But that's not everybody. Again, I really want a Mac. I only have X amount of dollars. I've got $1,000 to spend on the entire system, and I can't afford to spend $1,000 just on the Mac alone. That's perfectly fine.
Think about this. This gets into thinking about taking your iPhoto library or your photo library and putting it on a external source, which you should do anyway. But putting on that external source, because a lot of us have collections that are much larger than 256 gigs. So that might be where you start to those storage areas that might be a problem.